Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's presentation as part of the Industry Insight webinar series. The topic this time is Accepting Credit Card Payments, Boon or Bust, sponsored by Cosmolex. Speaking today will be Erica Bursler and Janelle Benefield. The Industry Insight webinar series is hosted by the ABA Legal Technology Resource Center. To stay updated on upcoming webinars or view previous videos, visit ambar.org/industryinsight. You can also stay updated on legal technology news through our blog, www.lawtechnologytoday.org. Erica Bursler is Manager of Customer Success at Cosmolex, developers of a cloud-based legal billing and trust accounting system specifically designed for solo and small law firms. Erica has a BS in Business Administration and 5 years' experience in the legal software industry, catering to the specialized technology needs of small to mid-sized law firms. She's given numerous presentations on legal technologies such as law practice technology management, cloud computing, and legal billing and trust accounting compliance. Janelle Benefield oversees sales and product development at LawPay. With over 15 years of experience in the credit card processing industry, she has in-depth knowledge of the challenges law firms face. Janelle brings enthusiasm to helping law firms better understand the world of Visa and MasterCard. Thank you all for joining us, and we will now begin the webinar.
Great, thank you so much. So as was mentioned, we're going to be talking about the challenges of accepting credit cards today. So we're going to go into a pretty deep dive, and as I was introduced, my name is Erica Bursler, and with that, let's go ahead and get started. So let's talk a little bit about the benefits of credit card payments. Now, it's always about cash flow, and credit card transactions, of course, would improve your cash flow. And there are many studies out there which show that law firm cash flow improves by 30 to 40% when you include credit card payments. Of course, in this digital age, people also prefer handling banking transactions online, and that's for various reasons. They have a sense of security and control. They can be mindful of their own cash crunch, or perhaps rewards or miles associated with their own credit card. So for this, clients will want to review the bill and pay online themselves. This is becoming more and more common. Also, with the appropriately signed authorization form from the client, your staff can also collect credit card information and charge it in the office itself. So in general, benefits of credit card acceptance by a law firm far outweighs fee and costs associated with the transactions. Now, there are 3 points of money interaction, especially when you're dealing with credit card payments. First is initial trust retainers being paid by credit card. They, of course, make collection and replenishment much quicker and secure. Also, fee prepayments, which is also known as an operating retainer or advance. These are collected more quickly and securely when you're using your credit card. And this process, of course, works for both your trust and operating retainers. Your client may be presented with a bill for the retainer. They can give the staff the credit card information or pay online from an invoice link. And the total invoice amount is deposited to the appropriate account as cash. So you can imagine this, of course, would provide faster access to your funds for payment of these fees. Now, ongoing invoice payments are also handled the same way. The client is presented with an invoice, they pay online, or you may have authorization to do so in your office. So just like that, the money can very quickly go into your own bank account. So let's talk about what is this webinar about? What's the problem here? Everything seems pretty straightforward, but there are a lot of banks, vendors that are selling their credit card services, and the only comparison seems to be about fees. But that's not the only comparison, and we will be discussing some of these differences as well. Now, the flow of a credit card payment is very different than accepting cash or check. It presents 2 sets of issues, which are completely different from one another. And these are the 2 areas that we'll be covering today. First is external challenges, which is the selection of the wrong provider, which of course can cause compliance nightmares. That's the merchant service provider that you choose. And second is internal challenges. Improper setup will cause daily bookkeeping headaches. So 2 of these, while very important, come from 2 ends of the spectrum. So Janelle from LawPay will now discuss the possible external challenges, and then I will come in and talk about the internal issues. Janelle?
All right. Oh, perfect. Thank you so much, Erica. So there are challenges that law firms face, and that's because working with providers, attorneys have programs that are some unique needs that really need to be taken into account. Things that work for restaurants and work for retail businesses typically don't work for law firms and the way that you are transacting business at the firm. And so, one size does not always fit all. One of the major issues or problems that we see when we're visiting with attorneys across the country is credit card fees being deducted from the trust account. Probably one of the biggest reasons we see law firms not accepting trust or retainer payments on credit or debit card is their concern about protecting that trust account from invasion, because it's very typical for a credit card processing company to deposit into an account and also want to deduct fees out of that same account. And obviously for law firms that absolutely doesn't work, and that is an issue. And so attorneys have decided, since that is not really designed for the way you take retainer payments, it's not designed to protect that trust account, not to accept a retainer payment by credit card or debit card. Another common issue, it kind of flows from this first example, is if a firm has decided not to take retainer payments by credit card, then you inevitably may have a client come in and that's the only way they want to pay, and that's what the client is requesting. And so we've seen situations where law firms, in an attempt to take care of that or satisfy that client's request, process a retainer payment and put it into their operating account instead, and then move money around behind the scenes. And so they've kind of got this duct tape accounting process going on, and they don't want to take trust payments into the trust account because they're concerned about fees being deducted, but then you're somewhat in a rock and a hard place because now you have a client who wants to pay that way, and that's what they're insisting on. And so this challenge can arise where the money's going into the wrong account, and then behind the scenes you're manually moving that money or that particular transaction, moving that around. Another challenge of working with a local bank or a provider that maybe doesn't have experience with law firms is, if you are taking your retainer payments, having the possibility of those retainer payments being placed on hold. If you have a restaurant, credit card transactions typically run in the $25 to $50, maybe $150 range. When a $25,000 payment comes through the system, that usually grabs people's attention. And so those large kinds of tickets can raise some flags, and then questions begin to be asked. Was this entered incorrectly? Was there a data entry error? What is this charge for? Have you started services? And then a lot of questions come along with that when funds are on hold. And if you're working with a group that's not familiar with retainer payments, those questions can be problematic, and that hold can be an issue, especially if you have a client that wants representation right away and has some immediate needs. And so again, just knowing the nature of law firms and what kinds of transactions are handled is very important when working with a provider. Another common issue that we certainly have heard from attorneys is fees being withdrawn prior to the deposit being made. And this can cause an issue certainly if you want to accept trust payments into your trust account, because that in essence is commingling the funds, from the beginning, so to speak. If you charge $5,000 and then the credit card processing entity is taking out their $125 fee, and then the deposit is the net amount, or $4,875. And so obviously that creates an issue with the trust account, but it can also create an accounting issue for you internally in your office. If the admin staff or the office staff is looking for a $5,000 deposit, they're not looking for $4,875. They're looking for the original $5,000 that they just ran 1 to 2 days ago. And so this adds some complexity to your accounting because the $5,000 doesn't match your deposit record into your bank. and again, just causes more confusion and can cause more time for your internal staff to try to reconcile those bank statements. The LawPay program, and it was actually designed for firms in the way you handle credit card transactions and debit card transactions at your office. It was actually designed for attorneys. And so it's one of the reasons why the LawPay program is currently endorsed by 40 state bars across the country, along with the American Bar Association, as the right way to handle credit card transactions there at your firm. And the key difference in our program is if you want to have the ability to accept a trust or a retainer payment by credit or debit card, we give firms the ability to deposit that money directly into the trust account. If you want to take an invoice payment for a past due dollar amount, or they're just catching up on their invoice over the telephone, those funds can be directed directly into your operating account. And the key to the LawPay program is that any fees associated with either a trust transaction or the operating transaction will only be deducted out of the operating account. And that way we make sure that we're safeguarding the trust balance, we're keeping that intact, and giving you the ability to solicit retainer payments and trust payments from your clients with confidence, because you know that money is going to be handled correctly behind the scenes for your accounting folks and for your office staff. And so just to kind of wrap up the points of my particular section, LawPay does not take fees out of the trust account. There's no deductions out of trust for processing fees. We do not deposit trust retainers into operating. Those funds can actually be directed to the correct location, which is your trust or IOLTA account. And then we do not deduct fees out of deposits prior to placing them into your bank account. And now I'll turn it back to Erica.
Thanks so much, Janelle. Okay, so Janelle did a great job at expressing the external issues you may run into when choosing a certain merchant service provider. So now let's address the internal issues which arise due to having a chaotic setup. So most law firms' billing systems do not include accounting. For accounting, typically a separate system such as QuickBooks is used. And having the separation of accounting software from the other two components, which is your billing and your practice management, this of course results in a classical gap. This then is obviously no longer just a small issue as you consider accepting your payments by credit card. So having this gap is actually a bigger issue once you start accepting credit card payments. Your billing system has the client invoice amounts, of course, but your accounting software receives the credit card deposit. So reconciliation is required daily, and this of course increases the risk of input errors. Now I have 3 questions listed here, and all 3 are interdependent. So let's start with the first one. The accounting system does not know if the invoice has been paid until you tell it so. So this of course is done by duplicate data entry when customers pay by check. So you may have it recorded in one system, and you need to duplicate it in the other system. So when you charge your client your billing system and the money is not going to show up in your accounting system, how are you going to account for that? You need to make sure that both steps are done properly. Then comes with your credit card batching, which we'll talk about in just a second on the next slide. And also, how will you handle disputes and chargebacks? As money is billed in one system and received in another, how you keep track of all of this? So these are 3 items that we will be discussing. First, we're going to approach the issue of credit card batching. Now, when your credit card company deposits funds into your bank for payments charged to your client by your office, it's commingled with payments made by other clients. It's one batch deposit into your bank. So in order to reconcile what's charged and what is funded, you must then manually total up the payments in the billing system and post that to your accounting system. And that is called credit card batching. Now, if you don't do this, the accounting system will have no idea what to do with $200 deposit, as you see on the screen, or the $1,200 when it comes into your bank after a day or 2. So in this example, in this slide, you'll see that I have a total of 4 transactions, 200 of which may come from Amex, and the remaining 1,200 may come in one bulk deposit from MasterCard or Visa. So how would you know that what that 1,200 is made up of is what we're talking about. So now this is not a one-time task. This is every single day you're going to have to take care of this. So I'm sure nobody wants to volunteer to do that. So how do you make that a little bit easier? And we'll talk about that when we get to a solution. Next is your voids and your chargebacks. Now your batches can include voids or chargebacks, also known as refunds. And the difference between the two is that a void is when your office refunds the money, maybe there's a mistake made and you recharge the correct amount. Unless it's done on the same day, money will be funded, taken out another day, and the correct amount will be funded again. So your voids, especially for credit cards, have to be included in your batch because it can happen on different dates. And what's a chargeback? This is, of course, client disputes, and if you can't overcome the dispute, money will be automatically taken out of your account, and you need to be able to account for that when it does happen. Either way, again, when you have two separate systems, how would your billing and accounting keep track of all this? And there's no easy answer, but we can definitely help with that. Now let's talk about what actually happens. In most firms, last resort is use of credit cards. You may have it on hand only for if your client says, I only have a credit card, I don't have cash or check. Extraordinary bookkeeping efforts. You're going through all these, jumping through all these hoops in order to get your bookkeeping done properly because it's not set up the right way. Or maybe you just hope everything's okay. You're following your current system and just hope it all works out. And we could do much better than that. You don't want to hope for the best. You want to actually use some tools that can better help you to have a unified system. So with that, one of the reasons Cosmolex enables such a solution is that it's a system which is fully integrated practice management, billing, and accounting. As you can see, the complete flow, which is listed right here, notice how smooth and unified it is. And that's the key when you want to deal with the challenges that we learned about today. So I will actually walk through each of these examples within Cosmolex so that you can see the full picture of the items that we discussed. So again, it's just having a solution or a process in place that makes all of this much simpler, unified, and accurate. So with that, let me just move over to the Cosmolex system. And I'm going to talk about each of the bullets that were listed there. So first of all is enabling such an integration. We integrate with LawPay, and Janelle did a great job of demonstrating how they set themselves apart from other providers. And one of them is it is legal specific, so they have a very good hold on what issues and needs are specific to attorneys. So to set up such an integration, you of course would have to have your merchant account set up with LawPay first. And then when I go ahead into my setup section of Cosmolex, I have a very easy way to turn on the app for LawPay. Now here we're setting up an integration with a merchant service provider. So by setting this up, there are many credit card processing and payment activities you'll be able to do, which I will demonstrate as well. So let me first log into my LawPay account. Okay, and then we're brought to this setup screen here. Pretty much all it is saying the banks that you have in Cosmolex, you also have merchant accounts with LawPay. Which ones do you want to map to which accounts? Typically, you may have one operating account and one trust account with your merchant service provider. So in this situation, I'm only going to link 2 banks. So let me just take my one trust account. I know I have many Cosmolex banks here. Forgive me. This is a test account. But here I can take my trust, and this is my merchant accounts through LawPay. So I'm going to link that with my trust, and I'm going to go to my operating account, and I'm going to link that as my operating. So this is pretty much saying any operating activities I do by credit card is linked directly to this bank and this merchant account. Same thing for trust. Now there's also this setting for default operating merchant account. This only has to do with paying invoices online. If your client wants to pay an invoice online, which account is that money going to go towards? So I'm going to select this account right here, and then I'm going to submit. And just like that, your integration is set up. So just to give you an idea of how simple and straightforward that can be. Now we'll talk about the various activities that you may find useful, not only with using such an integration, but how you're able to do this credit card processing in a system and cover both the billing and the accounting aspects. So first is when you're receiving a retainer. So let me just select a matter here. And if I wanted to receive a retainer, so let me actually search for my specific bank that happens to be linked to my accounts. All right, and if I selected this particular matter and received, let's say, a trust retainer, notice that I have this option to charge a credit card. So let me just do another $1,000, charge credit card, and when I save this, I will be brought to a credit card processing screen. So this is if you have your authorization form on hand, you want to go ahead and enter a credit card charge, I can very easily do so right here for this particular client, and I will be essentially receiving their retainer. Now the one thing you want to notice is this is very different from any other transaction in your system. Instead of it just being a recorded entry like a check or deposit, an action actually occurs when I do this. So once I hit charge, that credit card will be charged, and it's going to make an entry from a billing standpoint and an accounting standpoint. Okay, and that retainer is now received. Now if I wanted to, let's say, look into this matter, just to show you the transaction, I'm going to go to the transactions list here. You will see that I have a credit card notated to those that are linked to a credit card, those that were paid by credit card. So you have a good way of knowing individual transactions, what was by credit card and what might have been by cash or check. Now the next example I want to give is invoice payment. So let me find a matter as an unpaid balance here. So for instance, right here, let's say I wanted to pay this invoice in the office. Say I have that credit card authorization form, I want to go ahead and pay it. I have an option here, client credit card. Once I select that option, I just say the amount that I'm going to be charging, and this could be partial if need be, but in this case I'm going to go ahead and do a full payment. And again, it says to charge. That same screen pops up where you can go ahead and make that credit card entry and get that invoice paid by credit card. And of course, all of these charges will be reflected in your LawPay merchant account. Okay, so in that one step, I not only charged the client for the amount, but my invoice and everything has been marked as paid. Now another way to receive invoice payment, which is definitely the most convenient way, is when a client wants to pay an invoice online. So I'm going to find another matter here with an unpaid balance. And let's say I sent this invoice out to a client and they decide they want to pay online. You're thinking, how are they going to do that? Well, many merchant providers give you a link to pay that invoice online, and that's commonplace. But again, when you have your billing system and that merchant service provider separate, you still have to do two steps. They'll pay by the link, but you still need to put that payment on the invoice. The benefit of having both integrated is that if I were to look at this particular invoice, let's say I emailed this to the client, and I'm going to pull it up like the client is looking at this particular invoice. Okay, so you'll see at the very top here, I have a link to pay this invoice using credit card. So they'll see this link, they can click on it, and right away they're brought to a screen for invoice payment. Now what separates this from having your merchant service provider separate from your billing system is certain things are carried over. For instance, I of course have my branding, so I know that it's for the law firm. It doesn't say anything about Cosmelex, so people don't get confused. And it has the amount of this invoice. Now what's important about that is many times when you send a link to a client, you need to say how much is owed. This is already included. If this invoice was partially paid and there was only a balance of, say, $50, this would say $50. So it's whatever that balance is left on that invoice will show up automatically for that client. And let me show you what it's like if a client were to pay this invoice online. So like I mentioned before, there is a two-step process when you have your merchant service account and your billing separate. In this case, they're together. And what is the benefit? Well, when I receive this payment, not only is my client going to have a, oh, I put in a bad expiration date there, so let me go ahead and fix that. Okay, not only are they going to get confirmation that the particular invoice number is paid, but when I go ahead and go back to my system, and I'm just going to do a quick refresh, the invoice is updated, it is now paid. So literally, I've done nothing. If my client goes online, pays that invoice, I don't have to do anything. I don't have to update my invoice, I don't have to mark it as paid, I don't have to receive a payment. All of that is done automatically. Now let's say one of those particular transactions you wanted to refund, okay? We were talking about voids and chargebacks, and let's say that situation came up and you need to handle it. So I'm going to pull up the matter that we accepted that retainer for before. Okay, if I go into transactions, I'm going to have all my transactions here. So let's say this $1,000 deposit, it might have been, has to be a refund, maybe it was a chargeback, whatever the case may be. You cannot delete this transaction because unlike a check or cash that it may not have occurred in the bank, this is directly linked to your merchant account, so it was processed. So anytime you do anything to a credit card transaction, you essentially are providing a refund. So for that reason, of course you need a record of it, we give you the option to void. When you void, there's a nice big message up here letting you know that you're refunding the customer for whatever reason. And the second you complete that void, it will refund that money back to the customer automatically. So a nice, easy, clean process for when you need to undo a particular credit card charge. Now let's talk about another item I brought up, which was credit card batching. Okay, so you've received payments, they could be online, they could be manually in your office, could be check, cash, credit card, there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes on all day long. Now you receive, let's say, a $2,000 deposit in your bank from your merchant service provider. You have no idea what that's made up of. It could be 10 different invoice payments. You would have no idea. That is the importance of batching. And since Cosmolex is an end-to-end solution, goes all the way from your billing to your reconciliation, all of that's included here as well. So if I were to go into a particular bank, so let me go here into this operating bank, and I go to deposit slip. This is where you have that batching function. Okay, so if I have this option here, combine credit card payments, and here I'm provided with a list of all my credit card payments. I can even filter them by provider. And here I can check off the items that have been batched together. So everything that occurred, you'll get a daily report, you'll know what was done that day. You can go ahead and select those items from that particular day, and you'll see up here, I have a total. So in my reconciliation, I'll see a $25,640 deposit into the bank, and I'll now know what all of that was made up of. So my reconciliation will be nice, easy, and of course, error-free, which is always important.